In a hidden mansion by the sea, 4 billionaire widows held a dark secret. A poor village boy, just 22, trapped in a velvet chair, became the object of their twisted desires. Wealth, power, betrayal. When the walls cracked, even the police were stunned by what they found. But what became of the boy? And how did the mighty widows fall from grace? Stay with us till the very end of this shocking tale. Don't forget to comment your thoughts, like, share, and subscribe to Folktales by Noble, where the stories you hear will leave you breathless. The world often believes that wealth brings happiness, but hidden behind the polished glass towers of Lagos, behind the mansions lined with marble floors and chandeliers, some secrets are too dark for the world to imagine. This is the story of a club unlike any other. Not the kind of club where businessmen meet to discuss politics or where women sip champagne to gossip about fashion. No, this one was far more dangerous. Its members were bound not just by their riches, but by their loneliness, their hunger, and their obsession with control. They called themselves the Billionaire Widows Club. It was not a public organization. No one received invitations. There were no flashy signboards, no charity banners, no photographs in society magazines. In fact, most Lagos elites only whispered about them during cocktail parties. 4 powerful women, all widowed, who moved like queens in the corridors of money and politics. But behind the whisper of their names lay something else, a secret so deep it was locked behind the gates of a seaside mansion where their meetings took place every month under strict secrecy. At the head of the table sat Madame Adana, the one everyone feared and respected. She was 56 years old, with silver braids that fell down her back like the mane of a lioness. Time had not stolen her beauty. If anything, it had carved power into her cheekbones and authority into her posture. She wore flowing silk wrappers, always gold or emerald, and her wrists clinked with bangles worth more than most men's salaries. Adana had been married to Chief Obieze, one of the wealthiest oil magnates in Nigeria. But when death claimed him, she inherited not only his billions, but also his enemies. Through ruthless wit, she defended his empire and expanded it. But in the process, she became feared. Power was her shield, but deep inside, loneliness was her shadow. Beside her, with a laugh that rolled like thunder and a body that turned heads wherever she went, was Iyabo. At 54, Iyabo still looked like a woman who could stop traffic. Her curves were full, her chocolate skin flawless, and her bright Ankara gowns hugged her body like a second skin. She painted her nails blood red, as if to remind anyone who touched her that she could both charm and destroy. Iyabo was bold, flirtatious, and unapologetic. She loved to be admired, loved to see men stumble over their words when she entered a room. Yet, despite all the admirers who flocked to her wealth, she wanted something else, something she couldn't buy with her millions: sincerity. Then there was Ngozi, the quiet one. She was 52, slim as a reed, with natural gray dreadlocks and round eyeglasses that gave her the look of a poet. Unlike the others, she didn't parade her wealth. She preferred flowing caftans, beads instead of gold, and silence instead of flamboyance. But behind that fragile appearance lived a broken heart. Her husband had left her for a younger woman before death snatched him away. His betrayal haunted her, and now her loneliness was tinged with bitterness. Finally, Fatima, the schemer, tall, light-skinned, with sharp features and a smile that never reached her eyes. At 55, she carried herself like a queen of the desert. She was always draped in expensive abayas, and wherever she went, the scent of oud perfume lingered in the air. Fatima was calculating, always thinking 10 steps ahead, always turning people into pieces of her private chessboard. To her, life was not about love or loss. It was about power and control. These 4 women, different in temperament but united by circumstance, formed the core of the Billionaire Widows Club. Their meetings took place in Adana's seaside mansion, a fortress of wealth. The gates were guarded by men who never asked questions. The walls were lined with imported Italian marble. The chandeliers sparkled with crystals from Spain, and the dining table was long enough to host 20 guests. Yet, despite all this grandeur, the air inside always felt heavy, as if weighed down by secrets. On one particular evening, the women gathered, as they always did. The sea roared outside, waves crashing against the shore, but inside the mansion, silence reigned. Adana sat at the head of the table, sipping red wine. Iyabo, draped in yellow ankara, leaned lazily on her chair, her painted nails tapping against her glass. Fatima flipped through a diamond-studded phone, while Ngozi sat with her hands folded in her lap, her eyes distant. They weren't here to discuss business. Their billions were already secure. They weren't here for gossip either. What tied them together was something the outside world would never understand. That was the day Obiora entered their story. Obiora was a poor village boy, only 22, who had come to Lagos in search of work. His father had died when he was young, and his mother struggled alone to raise him and his siblings. To survive, Obiora took any job he could find, loading goods in markets, sweeping compounds, and sometimes working as a gardener. On this particular evening, he had been hired by Madame Adana's staff to trim the hedges in the garden and clear fallen leaves from the fountain. Dressed in a faded shirt and trousers patched at the knees, his lean frame moved with a strength that came from hardship. His skin was dark, his cheekbones sharp, and his eyes, though tired, were piercing, the kind of eyes that could not be ignored. From the window of the mansion, Iyabo was the first to notice him. She leaned closer, a smile playing on her lips. "Adana, who is that boy in your garden?" she asked, her tone teasing. Adana glanced out, her eyes narrowing. "Just a laborer, hired for the day." But Fatima leaned in too, her calculating eyes following the movement of Obiora's arms as he worked. "He is different. Look at him, so young, so untouched by this world." Ngozi said nothing, but her gaze lingered longer than she intended. Something about the boy stirred a memory of her own son, lost years ago. A pang of sorrow passed across her face. By the time Obiora was done with his work and came to the back door for payment, all 4 women were waiting. He froze, surprised to see them gathered there, their wealth and power pressing on him like an invisible weight. Adana spoke first. Her voice was calm, but it carried command. "What is your name, boy?" "Obiora," he answered, lowering his gaze. Iyabo tilted her head, her red nails glinting as she gestured at him. "Obiora, do you know who stands before you?" "Yes, madam," he said softly. "You are great women. Everyone in Lagos knows your names." Adana's lips curved into a smile, but it was the kind that never reached the eyes. "Good. Then you understand that we can change a man's life with a single word. Tell me, Obiora, what do you want most in this world?" Without hesitation, he answered, "To take care of my mother. To lift her from poverty." There was silence. The women exchanged glances. Iyabo chuckled. "How noble! But noble dreams don't feed families. Money does, and we can give you more than you ever dreamed of. She stepped closer, her perfume filling the air. From her purse, she pulled a bundle of cash, thick and crisp. She held it out to him with a smile. "Take it. It's yours." No questions asked. Obiora looked at the money, then at her face. His heart raced, but he shook his head. "No, madam. I cannot take what I did not earn." The room went still. Iyabo's smile faltered, replaced by a spark of irritation. Fatima leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing with interest. Adana studied him as though he were a puzzle. And Ngozi, for the first time in years, she felt a strange stir in her chest. A boy who could refuse wealth? In their world, such a thing was almost mythical. Adana finally spoke, her voice low but sharp. "You are either a fool or a very dangerous kind of man, Obiora." That night, after Obiora left with only his modest day's wage, the women sat in the grand hall of the mansion, the air thick with unspoken thoughts. Iyabo was the first to break the silence. "I want him. That boy will be mine." Fatima's lips curved into a sly smile. "You're not the only one. There's something about him, his defiance. It's intoxicating." Ngozi looked away, whispering, "He reminds me of what I lost." Of the innocence this world stole, Adana's fingers drummed against the table. Her silver braids glistened under the chandelier as she finally declared, "He is not just a boy. He is a test, and if we cannot bend him, then he will bend us. That must never happen." The four women looked at one another, their unspoken desires now binding them in a dangerous pact. From that night forward, Obiora was no longer just a gardener. He was prey caught in the gaze of lions. The Billionaire Widows Club had found its obsession. The mansion by the sea had always been a symbol of power and wealth, a fortress where deals were made and secrets buried. But for Obiora, it was about to become something else entirely, a cage. The night the trap was set was deceptively ordinary. He had returned once again for day labor, sweeping the compound and watering the flower beds. His worn-out shirt clung to his lean body, and the sweat of hard work glistened on his skin. He was eager to finish quickly, to collect his modest pay and return to his mother, who was waiting in the village with hope for the little money he always brought home. But inside the grand hall of the mansion, 4 pairs of eyes were watching him, waiting. When dusk fell, Madame Adana summoned him. She stood at the doorway, wrapped in an emerald wrapper that shimmered like the sea under moonlight. Her voice was calm, commanding. "Obiora, come inside. You've worked hard. Tonight, we will reward you." He hesitated. He was not used to stepping into the house itself, only the gardens and outer spaces. But refusing would appear rude, and Adana's gaze carried no room for argument. Inside, the mansion was dimly lit, chandeliers casting golden shadows across marble floors. At the long dining table sat the other widows, Iyabo in a fiery red ankara, her lips curved in a mischievous smile, Fatima draped in black silk, her eyes sharp and calculating, Ngozi in pale blue, her fingers nervously twisting her beads. The table was laden with food, spiced meats, steaming shallaf, bowls of fruits, and bottles of wine worth more than Obiora's entire lifetime earnings. "Sit," Adana instructed. Obiora obeyed, lowering himself onto the edge of a chair. His discomfort was visible. He sat like a man who knew he did not belong. Iyabo leaned forward, her red nails glinting as she placed a plate before him. "Eat. You need strength." He picked cautiously at the food, while the women watched him as though he were not a guest, but a specimen under glass. The silence between their gazes was heavier than the sound of the waves outside. When the meal was nearly done, Fatima spoke, her voice smooth as honey, but laced with steel. "Obiora, we have offered you money. We have offered you gifts. You refused. Do you know how many men would crawl on their knees for what you rejected?" Obiora swallowed, lifting his eyes with quiet defiance. "I do not want riches I did not earn. My dignity is all I have." Ayabo laughed, a low, sultry sound. "Dignity? That won't feed your mother. That won't change your life." But Adana raised a hand, silencing them all. Her eyes, dark and sharp, locked onto Obiora. "Perhaps," she said softly, "it is time we teach him that no one refuses us." The wine Obiora drank was rich and sweet, far beyond anything he had ever tasted. But hidden in its depths was a sleeping agent. He didn't notice it at first. His vision blurred slightly, his limbs grew heavy, his head swam. He tried to rise, but his knees buckled. Iyabo caught him with surprising strength, her lips twisting into a victorious smile. "Poor boy," she whispered, "you thought you could walk away from us." Darkness swallowed him. When Obiora awoke, the air was different. The sound of the sea was muffled. He was no longer at the dining table. He was lying on a velvet chair, his wrists and ankles bound with soft but unyielding restraints. Around him, the walls shimmered with silk drapes. A chandelier glowed overhead, casting light on a room that looked more like a throne chamber than a prison. But a prison it was. The door opened. Adana entered first, her silver braids gleaming. Iyabo followed, smiling triumphantly. Fatima closed the door behind them, and Ngozi lingered at the threshold, her face pale, her lips trembling as though she wanted to speak, but could not. Obiora struggled against the restraints, anger and fear surging through him. "Why are you doing this? Let me go." Adana's gaze was calm, unyielding. She stepped closer, her bracelets clinking. "You think you are strong, boy. You think your refusal makes you noble. But in this house, we decide. You will learn to obey." Iyabo bent low, her perfume filling the air. "Don't fight it, Obiora. Life can be sweet here if you accept us." But Obiora's eyes blazed with defiance. "You may bind my body, but you cannot take my soul." The words cut through the air like a blade. For a moment, even the widows were silent. From that night forward, Obiora's world changed. He was confined to the velvet-draped room, its windows sealed, its door always locked. Guards patrolled the hallways, loyal only to the widows. His meals were brought in on golden trays, rich foods far beyond his station, but they tasted like ash in his mouth. The widows visited him, each in her own way. Ayabo was bold and relentless, showering him with promises of wealth and pleasure if he would yield. She would bring him designer suits, gold chains, even keys to expensive cars, laying them before him like offerings. But when he refused, her laughter would turn sharp, and she would remind him, "You are nothing without us." Fatima was more cunning. She whispered of power, of a life where he could rise above his poverty and command men with a word. "You could be more than a boy from the village," she told him. "With us, you could be untouchable." Yet behind her eyes was not love, but control. She wanted to mold him into her puppet. Ngozi was different. She came quietly, often at night, bringing him extra bread or fruit. Her eyes held sorrow when she looked at him. "I'm sorry," she whispered once, her hands trembling as she adjusted his restraints. "This was not my wish, but I am too weak to stop them." Her guilt weighed on her, and sometimes tears shimmered in her eyes when she left. Adana, the leader, was the most terrifying of all. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't beg. She didn't threaten. She simply stood before him, regal and cold, and declared, "You will belong to us. Time will break you, and when it does, you will thank me for it." Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. But Obiora did not break. Though his body was bound, his spirit resisted. Every night when he was alone, he whispered prayers into the darkness. "God, I am not strong enough for this. But you are. Do not let me lose myself. Do not let their riches drown my soul." Sometimes he sang quietly hymns his mother had taught him as a child. The sound was faint, almost broken, but it carried hope through the suffocating air. His resistance infuriated the widows. Iabo grew impatient, throwing tantrums when he refused her gifts. Fatima's schemes grew darker. She even suggested they could brand him as their property. Adana remained calm, but beneath her silence burned a determination as sharp as steel. Only Ngozi softened. She began sneaking him small tokens. An untied knot loosened slightly. A window opened just enough to let in the sea breeze. And though she never said it aloud, her eyes betrayed her secret thought. Perhaps he doesn't belong here. Perhaps he deserves freedom. What had once united the women now began to divide them. At first, the club was about companionship, about shared grief and power. But Obiora had become more than a captive. He was a mirror of their deepest desires, their darkest needs. And that mirror was turning them against one another. One night, their argument echoed through the mansion. "He is mine!" Iabo shouted, her voice shaking the walls. "You are a fool!" Fatima snapped. "This is not about desire. It is about control. He is ours, not yours alone." Ngozi's voice trembled as she finally dared to speak. "What we are doing is wrong. Can't you see? We are destroying him, destroying ourselves." Adana silenced them all with a single look. Her voice was cold, commanding, "Enough! We are not schoolgirls fighting over a toy. We are the Widows' Club, and he will remain here until he bends. Do you understand?" But cracks had already begun to form in their unity. Their once secret sisterhood was now a battlefield of envy, obsession, and guilt, and Obiora, though trapped, could sense it. Each passing day he realized that the walls of his prison were not just built around him, but around the women themselves. Their wealth could not buy peace. Their power could not fill the void, and sooner or later something would break. Obiora closed his eyes one night as the waves roared outside, whispering to himself, "I am their prisoner, but I am not theirs. My soul is still mine, and I will find a way out." The mansion was silent, but the cracks had begun. The storm was coming. The sea outside the mansion never stopped roaring. Its waves pounded against the rocks with a rhythm that felt like a warning, as if nature itself knew the walls of the Billionaire Widows Club were beginning to crumble. Inside, however, silence often hung heavy, a silence woven with mistrust and hidden battles. The mansion, once a sanctuary of luxury and control, had turned into a battlefield of obsession. And at the center of it all was Obiora, the poor boy whose very resistance had ignited war among the widows. It had been nearly 3 months since Obiora's captivity began. He had grown leaner, his cheekbones sharper, but his spirit remained unbroken. The velvet-draped room that was meant to weaken him had instead become a fortress of inner strength. But for the women, the walls were closing in. Iabo had grown restless. Her fiery nature could not stand rejection for long. She would storm into the room, perfume preceding her, nails clicking as she waved bundles of money in his face. "Obiora," she said one evening, frustration flashing in her eyes, "do you know how many men would kill to be in your place? I am offering you everything, cars, houses, the world at your feet, and you dare look at me with that stubborn face?" Obiora lifted his head, his voice steady, though his body was frail. "I told you, madam. My dignity is not for sale." Her laugh was sharp, almost bitter. "Then you are a fool, and fools always suffer." She threw the money on the floor and stormed out. Fatima, meanwhile, grew more dangerous with every passing day. She had always been the strategist of the group, and now she began drawing plans in her mind. To her, Obiora was no longer just a man. He was a tool, a weapon to be controlled. "Adana," she said one night during their private gathering, her voice smooth but cold, "why waste time? Let us break him once and for all. If we cannot win him with gifts, then we must own him with fear." Adana's silver braids shimmered under the light as she regarded Fatima. She did not answer immediately. Adana was not one to rush, but her silence was agreement enough. And then there was Ngozi. Every day she looked thinner, her caftans hanging loose on her frail body. Guilt gnawed at her like a slow poison. When she visited Obiora, she brought fruits, sometimes loosening his restraints for a few moments to let blood flow through his hands. "I'm sorry," she whispered one night, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I never wanted this, but I was too weak to stop them." Obiora looked at her, his eyes softening. "Then help me. If you cannot free me, at least do not let them destroy me." Those words burned into her soul. For the first time in years, Ngozi felt something she thought she had lost. Purpose. The first visible crack appeared during a late-night meeting. The women sat in the grand dining hall, wine glasses in hand, the sea wind howling against the shutters. Iyabo slammed her glass on the table. "This is ridiculous. He should be mine alone. I was the first to notice him, the first to bring him gifts. Yet you all act as if he belongs to you too." Fatima sneered. "You speak like a child. This is not about your infatuation. This is about control. He is not a man to love. He is a man to use." Ngozi finally raised her trembling voice. "Can you not hear yourselves? We sound like predators. We have turned into monsters. Look at us. Look at what we've become." The room fell silent. Adana's gaze swept over them, her authority filling the air. "We are not monsters," she said coldly. "We are survivors. The world took our husbands, left us empty, mocked us behind our backs. We have earned the right to take what we want." Iyabo's lips curled. "Even if what we want is a boy who despises us." Adana's voice cut like a knife, "especially then. His resistance makes him valuable. Breaking him will prove our power." But even as she spoke, the bond between them was fraying. What had once been a club united by grief and wealth was now a cauldron of envy, greed, and guilt. The irony was clear. Though bound, Obiora was the one shaping their destinies. Iyabo grew more desperate. Fatima became more ruthless. Ngozi more torn. And Adana grew colder, more determined to maintain control as the leader. Obiora himself noticed the tension. Whenever the women visited him, he spoke not with fear, but with quiet strength. "Do you not see?" he told Iyabo one night. "You are fighting one another because of me. I am just a poor boy, yet I have become the center of your lives. Is this truly the power you boast of?" Iyabo slapped the table beside him, her nails digging into the wood. But her anger was not at him. It was at the truth in his words. To Ngozi, he whispered, "You are not like them. I see it in your eyes. You still have a heart. Do not let it die here." Her tears flowed freely, and for the first time she considered betraying the very sisterhood she had sworn loyalty to. The breaking point came on a stormy night. The rain lashed against the mansion, thunder rumbling in the distance. The widows had gathered in the velvet chamber where Obiora was kept, their faces tense, their voices raised. Iyabo stood in front of Obiora, her hands clutching his restraints. "He will be mine tonight. I don't care what any of you say." Fatima's voice sliced through the room. "Over my dead body, you will not ruin my plans. He belongs to the club, not to your childish fantasies." Ngozi stepped forward, her frail frame shaking. "Enough! Can't you see he is dying inside? If we keep this up, there will be nothing left of him or us." Adana rose to her full height, her presence silencing them all. Her silver braids shimmered in the candlelight as she declared, "I am the leader here, and as long as I live, no one will act without my command. Obiora stays where he is. This is not about desire, it is about victory." The storm outside seemed to echo the storm inside. The women glared at one another, the bond of their club hanging by a thread. That night, when the mansion finally fell quiet, Ngozi crept into Obiora's chamber. Her hands shook as she unlocked one of his restraints, loosening it just enough for him to move his wrist. "Run," she whispered, tears falling onto his arm. "Run before they destroy you." "I will distract them." But before Obiora could act, the door burst open. Iyabo stood there, her eyes blazing with fury. "Ngozi! You traitor!" The room erupted into chaos. Iyabo lunged at Ngozi, slapping her across the face. Fatima rushed in behind her, shouting curses, while Obiora struggled against his half-loosened restraints. Adana arrived last. Her face cold with rage, the women screamed at one another, their voices rising above the roar of the storm. Accusations flew of betrayal, of greed, of weakness. For the first time, their unity was shattered in full view of the very man they had tried to dominate. And Obiora, though still trapped, realized something profound. The prison was no longer his alone. The mansion itself had become their prison too. From that night forward, nothing was the same. The Widows' Club no longer met in harmony. Each woman withdrew into her own world of anger, suspicion, and guilt. Guards whispered among themselves, sensing the tension. Even the air in the mansion felt different, thicker, heavier, like a storm waiting to break. Adana fought to maintain control, but she knew the truth. The cracks were widening, and soon the entire structure would collapse. And in the center of it all sat Obiora, frail but unbroken, whispering to himself in the darkness, "They think they hold me, but it is they who are bound. Their wealth is their chain, their desires are their curse, and soon the world will see." The waves crashed harder against the shore as if the sea itself knew that the end was near. The mansion was no longer a fortress, it was a ticking time bomb, and the explosion was coming. The mansion stood like a fortress by the sea, its golden gates gleaming under the sun, a place that once radiated untouchable wealth and power. But behind those tall walls, corruption had festered. By now, even the tides of the ocean seemed restless, crashing harder against the rocks as though summoning judgment. And judgment was coming. Ngozi had not slept for days. Her frail hands trembled whenever she carried food to Obiora, and her heart raced whenever she heard Adana's cold commands or Iabo's furious rants. The boy's eyes haunted her, the quiet defiance, the suffering carved into his face, and yet the strength that refused to break. She could not take it any more. Late one evening, while the other widows drowned their envy in wine, Ngozi locked herself in her chamber, lifted her phone, and dialed a number she thought she'd never call. "Police emergency, what's your report?" a voice answered. Her lips quivered. She almost hung up. Almost. But then she remembered Obiora's whispered plea, "Do not let them destroy me." "There's a boy," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He's being held against his will in the mansion by the coast. Please, come quickly, before they kill him." She dropped the phone, collapsing to the floor, her chest heaving with guilt and relief. It was done. At dawn, the sound of roaring engines broke the silence of the coastal road. Police vans rolled up to the mansion gates, tires crunching gravel. Armed officers in black vests jumped out, weapons raised, their boots pounding as they surrounded the property. Inside, the widows were caught off guard. Iabo was in the velvet chamber, pacing furiously. Fatima was in the study, drafting contracts to shield her empire. Adana was in her private spa, her silver braids wrapped in a towel. Ngozi sat trembling in her room, waiting for what she had unleashed. The doors burst open with a crash. Officers stormed in, shouting commands. "Hands up!" Nobody move. What they found stunned even hardened lawmen. In the velvet chamber sat Obiora, frail but alive, tied to a velvet chair, his wrists bruised but his eyes still burning with defiance. Around him, the widows screamed at one another like wild animals, expensive robes tangled as they shoved and accused. The room glittered with jewels and money strewn about, but the air was thick with desperation. One officer muttered under his breath, "God have mercy! Look at this madness!" The widows were dragged out, protesting in humiliation, their silk robes flapping as cameras flashed outside the gates. The world had finally breached the walls of their kingdom. By evening, the story had already exploded across every television, radio, and smartphone in the nation. Headlines screamed, "Billionaire Widows Club Exposed. Wealth, Desire, and Dark Secrets in Coastal Mansion. Poor village boy held hostage by rich widows." Talk shows feasted on the scandal. Commentators debated whether it was lust, greed, or madness that had driven the women. Memes flooded social media, mocking their arrogance. And for the first time, their wealth could not shield them. Adana, the leader, was dragged through the courts. The woman once feared for her composure and authority now faced judges who looked at her not as a queen, but as a criminal. Her face, once flawless in public, was splashed across tabloids, her reputation ruined forever. Iyabo vanished from the public eye, retreating into shame. No more loud laughter, no more flamboyant entrances into Lagos's elite parties. She became a ghost in the city she once dominated. Fatima fought hardest. She poured money into lawyers, bribed officials, and tried to bend the system as she always had. But empires built on fear and exploitation crumble quickly. Her business associates abandoned her. Her empire collapsed, brick by brick, until she was left with nothing but her name in disgrace. And Ngozi? Ngozi disappeared from the limelight quietly. She did not defend herself, nor did she try to explain. She had made her choice when she called the police, and though her life was stained, she found a measure of peace in knowing she had freed Obiora. She withdrew into seclusion, a woman broken but unburdened. Obiora became the center of the storm, Reporters swarmed him, begging for interviews, offering money for his story. But he rejected them all. He did not want to be a spectacle. He wanted to be free. When the courts finally released him into the care of his family, he returned to his village. His body bore the scars of captivity, thin wrists, hollow cheeks, but his spirit was intact. He had been broken in body, but not in soul. The villagers gathered around him when he walked back into the fields where he once toiled, their eyes wide with both pity and pride. Children whispered his name as if he were a legend. Old men shook their heads in disbelief that one of their own had been at the center of such a scandal. Standing barefoot in the soil, the same soil that had once stained his clothes as a laborer, Obiora breathed deeply. The air smelled of yam fields and wood smoke, not perfume and corruption. He whispered to himself, "I was their prisoner, but I kept my soul. That is my victory over time,